All right, welcome everybody. These are the notes that you will compare to your notes for matter and energy, pages 45 to 52 out of our textbook. This section has an explanation of the kinetic theory of matter, and theory is just a fancy word saying an explanation for things observed. So based on how we know matter interacts, we believe that matter is made up of tiny particles that are moving. And the motion of these particles is depending on the temperature of the particles. So there's some important things here in that temperature does tell us how fast the particles will move. Right there. Doesn't want to let me write. And when the temperature increases, so does the motion of the particles. And we need to remember that temperature is a measure of the speed of the particles. And when I say particles, we're talking about those tiny little combination of atoms that make up everything that is matter. And this is a biggie. It was a definition from our last unit, and it was on our test, and a lot of people got it wrong. Matter is anything that has mass and volume. Everything in our universe is either matter or it's energy. If it does not have mass and volume, like lightning, it's energy. Electricity is energy. But if it's an object, a substance that has mass and volume, it is matter. So quickly to review from middle school, you guys know that there are what we call 3 states of matter. So depending on the type of substance and the temperature, the matter will either be a gas, a liquid, or a solid. And you guys know that the solid particles are close together, very, very tightly together, and they vibrate in place. Liquid particles are also close together, but they're free to move around one another, so they can move around. And gas particles are, in comparison, very spread out, and they can fill up their whole container. Gases and liquids are typically called fluids because they can flow and move around one another. And then there's always this technical definition of gases have indefinite volume and indefinite shape. That means they take the shape of whatever they're in, and there can be any amount of gas inside of it, and we talk about that in terms of pressure. Liquids have a definite volume. There's a certain amount in there, but they can take whatever shape their container is, and solids always have definite shape and definite volume. All right, pressure is a measurement we use with fluids only. And pressure, the translation of the measurement of pressure is the number of times gas particles collide with one another. So the number of times gas particles bounce into one another or bounce off the walls of their container, we call that pressure. The fancy definition of pressure is force exerted per unit area. That will make a lot more sense when we get into forces. What you just need to know is gases can push into each other more often or less often depending on their temperature and their pressure and their volume. All right, you guys know that matter can change states from solid to liquid to gas. You will need to know the names of the changes. If you have a solid that's changing to a liquid, we call that melting. But if you're taking away heat energy and the liquid is changing to the solid, we call that freezing. There's a couple of fancy names for this. The fancy name for freezing is sometimes called crystallization. And then vaporization, the easy name for that, that's where a liquid is changing to a gas. We're heating it up. You and I might call that boiling. Scientists would call that vaporization. If you have a gas and it's losing heat energy and it's changing to a liquid, we call that condensation. There is a term missing here, and I'm going to scroll down so you can see the next picture. But this graph is just temperature along the y-axis. So as your temperature increases, as we measure it, we're adding heat, and down along this axis is really time. As time goes on and we add and add more heat and the temperature of the substance rises, the substance will change eventually from a solid to a gas. All substances can eventually turn to gas. On the sun, even metals are gas. They're actually plasmatic gases because they're in such high energy and they're so hot. All right. Again, these words that you should know, and you guys should know these changes already. I like their use of red for heating up and blue